Every single year, doctors notice something strange sitting quietly in the data. A disproportionate number of heart attacks and strokes don't happen during exercise. They don't happen during arguments, or late at night, or during any of the moments you'd expect the body to be under real strain. They happen in the first couple of hours after waking up, right in the middle of what looks, from the outside, like the calmest, safest part of anyone's day. That fact alone tends to surprise people the first time they hear it. Mornings feel gentle, slow, almost protective compared to the rest of the day, and yet the numbers keep pointing back to that same narrow window over and over across decades of research, in study after study, in different countries, with different populations. It isn't a fluke of one dataset. It's a pattern that shows up wherever researchers look closely enough at the timing. Here's what makes it harder to sit with. 5 extremely common morning habits appear to be a meaningful part of why that window carries so much risk, especially once you're past 60. Not rare habits. Not unusual routines followed by a small handful of people. Habits that happen in almost every household, almost every single morning, without anyone giving them a second thought. You've probably done at least 2 of them today already, without even noticing you were doing them. I want to walk you through all 5 of them in this video, where each one comes from, why it puts extra pressure on your heart at exactly the moment your body is least prepared to absorb it, and what you can actually do differently, starting as early as tomorrow morning. None of this requires a major life overhaul. Almost none of it requires giving anything up. Most of what I'm going to describe is really a matter of sequencing, doing the same things you already do, in a slightly different order, at a slightly different pace, so your body isn't asked to handle everything all at once. I've spent years working with patients on exactly this kind of morning risk, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that almost nobody arrives in my office already knowing this information. They find out after something has already happened, after a scare, after a diagnosis, after a hospital stay that could have gone very differently if a few small things had been done differently the week before. My hope with this video is that you get to skip that part entirely, that you get the information before you need it instead of after, when the stakes are lower and the choices are still entirely yours. Before we get into the 5 habits themselves, I want to mention something briefly, because a number of you have asked about it in the comments on previous videos. Everything I share here is one piece of a larger picture I've put together for my own patients. A full walkthrough of the habits worth changing, the warning signs worth knowing, and the specific questions worth bringing to your own doctor after 50. It's laid out step by step, in plain language, without the medical jargon that makes so much of this information harder to use than it needs to be. If that sounds useful to you, there's a link in the description whenever you're ready for it. I won't dwell on it any longer than that. Let's get into what actually matters this morning, which is understanding why your body behaves the way it does the moment you open your eyes. Here's the part almost nobody realizes, even people who've lived with high blood pressure for years and think they already know everything there is to know about it. While you're asleep, your blood pressure drops. That's not a malfunction. It's supposed to happen. Your body is resting, so it doesn't need blood circulating at full daytime pressure. But the moment you start to wake up, that changes, and it changes fast. Your body releases a wave of stress hormones, mainly cortisol and adrenaline, and your blood pressure climbs back up toward its normal daytime level within a fairly short window, often just 20 or 30 minutes. Every single person experiences some version of this surge. On its own, it isn't a warning sign. It's simply how a body wakes up, the same way an engine needs a moment to warm up before it runs smoothly. But there are 3 separate things happening at once during that climb, and understanding all 3 is really what makes the rest of this video make sense. So, bear with me for a moment, because this part matters more than it might seem at first. The first is the hormone surge itself. Cortisol and adrenaline don't just wake your brain up. They raise your heart rate and tighten your blood vessels, both of which push your blood pressure upward fairly quickly, sometimes within just a few minutes of your eyes opening. The second is something that tends to happen gradually to blood vessels as we age, which is a kind of stiffening. Younger blood vessels are more elastic. They stretch and absorb sudden changes in pressure the way a rubber hose would, flexing with each pulse. Older blood vessels behave more like a slightly rigid pipe, which means that same morning surge doesn't get cushioned the way it once did decades earlier. And the third piece is a slower recovery time. In someone in their 20s or 30s, the body's internal sensors correct for small shocks within a second or two, almost without you noticing anything happened at all. In someone in their 60s, 70s, or beyond, that correction process can take noticeably longer, leaving a wider window where blood pressure is less stable than usual, and where an added stressor lands on a system that hasn't quite finished resetting. I like to picture it as a swimming pool right after someone jumps off a diving board. In a young, deep pool, the wave from that splash rolls outward and settles almost immediately. The sheer volume of water absorbs the disturbance with ease, and within a few seconds, the surface is calm again. In a shallow, older pool, that same splash sloshes back and forth for a while before it calms down because there's less room and less depth to absorb the initial shock. Your cardiovascular system at 60 is a lot more like that shallow pool. Nothing has to go wrong for the water to still be moving. It's simply a different kind of pool than it used to be. So to be clear, the surge itself isn't the danger. It happens to everyone, every single day, and the overwhelming majority of the time, it resolves on its own, without incident, without you ever noticing it occurred. The danger is what gets added on top of it. And that's exactly where these 5 habits come in. Each one, in its own particular way, throws something extra into a pool that's already sloshing around from the wave that just hit it, right when it has the least capacity to absorb one more disturbance. Let's go through them one at a time, starting with the 5th on the list and working our way down to the one I personally think matters the most. Habit number 5 is reaching for coffee before you've had any water at all. For a huge number of people, this is the very first physical action of the day. Out of bed, straight to the kitchen, straight to the coffee maker, no water anywhere in between. It feels completely harmless, mostly because it's so automatic. Nobody consciously decides to skip water in favor of coffee. It just happens. The same way it happened yesterday and the day before that, and probably every day for the last several years. But think for a second about what your body has actually been doing for the past 6 or 7 hours while you slept. No fluid intake of any kind for that entire stretch. That alone leaves you mildly dehydrated by the time you wake up, which thickens the blood slightly and makes your heart work a little bit harder just to keep it circulating normally through vessels that are already narrower than usual first thing in the morning. Caffeine then adds another layer directly on top of that. It's a stimulant, and its whole job in a sense is to nudge your heart rate and blood pressure upward, which is exactly the direction they're already heading, thanks to the natural morning surge we just walked through together. On a normal day, in a younger, more flexible cardiovascular system, that combination barely registers as anything at all. But in someone whose vessels are already a bit stiffer, and whose recovery window is already a bit slower, it's one more push in the same direction, arriving at precisely the moment the system is least equipped to absorb it gracefully. The fix here has nothing to do with giving up coffee, and I want to be clear about that, because I know how much people love their morning cup, and I would never ask anyone to give that up. It's purely about sequencing. A full glass of water before your first cup of coffee rehydrates you and gives your blood pressure a chance to begin leveling off before caffeine adds its own bump on top. It costs you maybe 90 seconds, and your coffee tastes exactly the same either way. Still hot, still yours. Habit number 4 is picking up your phone within the first few minutes of being awake, specifically to check email, scroll the news, or look at anything that tends to carry even a little bit of stress with it. I want you to think honestly about your own mornings for a second, without judging yourself for the answer. Is your phone the very first thing your hand reaches for, even before your feet hit the floor? Mental stress does something very real and very measurable to your body, and it isn't subtle. It triggers the exact same cortisol and adrenaline pathway that's already firing because of the natural wake-up surge. So instead of that surge rising and then leveling off on its own schedule, a stressful headline, a tense work email, or an argument in a group chat keeps that pathway elevated, sometimes for far longer than the original surge would have lasted by itself. You're essentially triggering the same alarm system twice in a row, back to back, before your body has even finished responding to the first alarm it went through moments earlier. What makes this one tricky is that it doesn't feel like a bad habit. It feels productive. Getting ahead of the day, staying informed, clearing out the inbox before breakfast so it isn't hanging over you later in the afternoon. But your cardiovascular system doesn't distinguish between useful stress and pointless stress. As far as your blood vessels are concerned, a work deadline and a mildly annoying headline about something you have no control over produce nearly identical physical responses. The fix here is a delay, not a deletion. You don't need to give up your phone or your morning routine of catching up on the world. Give yourself 15 or 20 minutes of simply being awake before you look at anything with the potential to spike your stress response. Let the natural surge do its thing and settle on its own first. Whatever's waiting in your inbox will still be there in 20 minutes. It almost always is, and it will still be there whether you look at it now or a little later. Habit number 3 is the one that tends to surprise people the most because almost nobody connects it to their heart at all. It's skipping breakfast entirely and moving straight into something demanding. A stressful errand, a rushed shower, a tense conversation, anything that asks a fair amount of you, while running on a completely empty stomach. Here's why that combination matters more than it looks like it should. When you haven't eaten anything, your blood sugar is already sitting on the lower end after a full night without food of any kind. Add physical or emotional demand directly on top of that, and your body compensates by releasing even more stress hormones to make up the difference, which pushes your heart rate and blood pressure up further than the morning surge alone ever would have. You end up stacking 3 separate things at once. The natural wake-up surge, a blood sugar dip, and an added demand your body genuinely wasn't prepared to handle yet, all layered on top of each other within the same narrow window. I've had more than a few patients describe feeling shaky, lightheaded, or oddly anxious on rushed, breakfast-skipping mornings, and almost none of them ever connected that feeling to their heart. Most chalked it up to being tired, or being in a hurry, or just having an off day for no particular reason. Sometimes that really is all it is, but in someone with existing cardiovascular risk, that particular combination is doing considerably more than simply making you feel a little off around the edges. If that one caught you a bit off guard, the way it tends to catch most people, that reaction is worth sitting with for a moment. It's probably one of the easiest habits on this entire list to fix, because even a small amount of food changes the equation meaningfully. And since we're already talking about it, tell me down in the comments which of these 5 habits is the one you genuinely didn't expect to hear on this list. I read every single comment, and I'm always curious which of these 5 lands differently depending on who's watching and what their own mornings tend to look like. The fix for this habit doesn't require a full sit-down meal, and I want to be clear about that too, because I know mornings are rushed for almost everyone and nobody has time for a full breakfast spread. Even something small does the job. A piece of fruit, a handful of nuts, half a slice of toast, a few bites of yogurt. Just enough to give your blood sugar something to work with before you ask your body to handle anything demanding on top of the surge it's already managing on its own. We're now roughly halfway through the list, and I want to be upfront with you about something. The last 2 habits are the ones I most want you to walk away remembering today, because together they explain almost everything we've already covered up to this point, and they tend to be the 2 people are most surprised to hear connected to their heart at all. Habit number 2 is standing up too quickly or bending down fast to do something like tie your shoes or pick something up off the floor right after getting out of bed. This one connects back to a mechanism we haven't touched on yet, so let's slow down here for a moment. When you're lying flat, Blood is distributed fairly evenly across your body, with no single area doing extra work to fight gravity. The instant you sit up or stand, gravity pulls a noticeable amount of blood down into your legs, which briefly reduces how much blood is making its way back up to your heart and brain. In a younger body, specialized pressure sensors located near your neck and chest catch that shift almost instantly and adjust within a second or two, well before you'd ever notice anything unusual happening. After 60, those same sensors often respond more slowly than they used to, which leaves a wider gap where your brain is temporarily receiving less blood flow than it actually needs to function normally. That gap is exactly what produces the dizzy, foggy, slightly unsteady feeling a lot of people get right after standing up first thing in the morning, often reaching for a wall or a nightstand without quite knowing why. Most people write that feeling off as simply needing a minute to fully wake up, and honestly, most of the time, that's genuinely all it is. Nothing more sinister than a body that hasn't finished its morning recalibration yet. But it's also a direct physical signal that your regulatory system is still playing catch-up, and asking it to perform something demanding during that exact gap. Rushing to the bathroom, bending sharply to grab a pair of slippers, hurrying because an alarm is going off somewhere down the hall, puts extra strain on a system that's quietly asking for a few more seconds before it's fully back online and ready to keep up with you. The fix here is something I sometimes call a staged rise, and it's about as simple as fixes come. Sit on the edge of the bed for a full 30 seconds before standing all the way up. It sounds almost too small to matter, and I understand the skepticism, believe me. But those 30 seconds give your blood pressure regulation system the head start it needs to catch up before you ask it to fully support you upright, walking around and moving through the rest of your morning. And now, habit number 1. The one that, in my opinion, ties every single thing we've discussed together into one connected picture. It's postponing your morning blood pressure medication, taking it late, taking it after breakfast instead of before, or skipping it altogether on mornings that feel too rushed and chaotic to remember. Think back for a moment over everything we've already covered. The natural surge that hits everyone the moment they wake. The coffee that arrives before the water does. The phone that gets checked before the stress response has had time to settle. The empty stomach asked to power through something demanding. The quick stand that outpaces the body's own regulatory catch-up. Every single one of those habits is happening inside a window that your medication is specifically timed to protect you through, hour by hour, from the moment you take it. Most blood pressure medications are designed to reach their strongest effect in the hours immediately following your usual dose. For the majority of people taking a morning dose, that window lines up almost exactly with everything we've spent this entire video walking through. It's not a coincidence. It's precisely the reason morning dosing is so often recommended by doctors in the first place, timed deliberately to cover this specific stretch of the day. When that dose gets pushed back because the morning felt too rushed, or skipped entirely because it slipped your mind in the chaos of getting out the door, your body moves through that entire vulnerable stretch without the buffer it was specifically prescribed to provide. To be fair, missing one single dose on one single morning isn't by itself catastrophic, and I don't want anyone panicking over one forgotten pill. The real issue is what happens when a delayed dose lines up with any of the 4 habits we just went through morning after morning, week after week. That combination is what removes the one thing standing between a completely normal surge and a genuinely exaggerated one. I want to pause here for a moment because I don't want to leave you with a list of 5 slightly alarming things and nothing constructive to actually do with them. None of these habits, individually or combined, guarantee that something bad is going to happen to you. Plenty of people do several of these every single day for years and years without any incident at all. What the research actually supports is something a good deal more modest and, honestly, more useful to you in practice than a scare tactic would be. Each of these 5 represents a real, identifiable moment where your heart is being asked to work harder than it strictly needs to, and adjusting even 1 or 2 of them meaningfully lowers how often that particular collision happens over the course of a year. So let's talk fixes, because that's really the entire point of everything we've covered so far. There are 5 of them, and they line up one-to-one with the 5 habits we already walked through, in the same order, so nothing here should feel unfamiliar. The first fix is sequencing your morning drink order deliberately. Water before coffee, every time, giving your body a genuine chance to rehydrate before caffeine adds its own separate push on top of the natural surge that's already underway. The second fix is delaying your phone for the first 15 to 20 minutes you're awake, so mental stress isn't stacked directly on top of a hormone surge that's already actively in motion. The third fix is putting something into your stomach, even something small, before asking your body to handle anything physically or emotionally demanding, no matter how minor it might seem. The fourth fix is that 30-second staged rise we talked about. Sitting on the edge of the bed before standing all the way up, giving your body's pressure regulation system a real chance to catch up before you're fully vertical and moving. And the fifth fix, the one I'd genuinely argue matters most if you only change a single thing after watching this video today, is anchoring your medication to something you already do without fail, every single day, no matter how rushed the morning gets, or how little sleep you had the night before. Brushing your teeth, starting the coffee maker, whatever's truly automatic in your particular routine. Physically place the medication right next to that trigger, so taking it becomes the very first domino in your morning, instead of something you're quietly hoping to remember once things eventually calm down later on. None of these 5 fixes require special equipment, an app, or a subscription of any kind. They require moving a pill bottle to a different shelf, filling a glass of water, and waiting a few extra minutes here and there. That's genuinely the whole toolkit, and I think that simplicity is exactly why it works as well as it does for the patients who actually stick with it. Let me pull the whole list together one more time, because I think it's genuinely worth hearing it in one clean, connected pass before we wrap up. Habit 5 is reaching for coffee before water, adding a stimulant on top of mild overnight dehydration. Habit 4 is checking your phone before your stress response has had any real chance to settle, effectively triggering the same alarm system twice in a row. Habit 3 is skipping breakfast and moving straight into something demanding, stacking a blood sugar dip directly onto the natural surge. Habit 2 is standing or bending too quickly, before your body's own pressure regulation has had time to catch up with gravity's pull. And habit 1, the one that connects to every single thing before it, is delaying or skipping your morning blood pressure medication during the exact window it was prescribed to protect. None of these 5 are exotic. That's really the entire point of this video, and it's why I wanted to make it in the first place. They're not rare mistakes made by a small, unlucky handful of people somewhere out there. They're default settings in most households, repeated automatically morning after morning without anyone ever stopping to ask whether the order those things happen in actually matters. As it turns out, the order matters quite a bit more than most people would ever guess, and the fixes cost almost nothing to try. If you made it through all 5 and found yourself quietly nodding along at 1 or 2 of them, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not stuck with them either. Small sequencing changes, the kind we just walked through together, are some of the easiest adjustments in all of preventive cardiology. Precisely because they don't ask you to give anything up, you still get your full cup of coffee. You still catch up on your phone. You still get to move through your morning the way you always have. You're just doing it in a slightly different order, at a slightly different pace. And that alone takes real pressure off a system that's already working hard the moment you open your eyes every single day. If this video was useful to you, I'd genuinely appreciate a like. It helps this reach more people who are quietly dealing with exactly this kind of thing after 60, often without realizing it themselves. If you haven't subscribed yet, consider doing that too. I put out videos like this one regularly, all aimed at making this kind of information practical and usable instead of overwhelming or fear-inducing. And if you know someone in your life whose mornings look like a rushed, chaotic version of everything we just talked about today, go ahead and send them this video. Sometimes the most useful thing you can hand another person isn't a lecture or a warning. It's 15 minutes that quietly reorganizes something they've been doing on autopilot for years without ever questioning it. And if you want the fuller version of everything we touched on today, The complete checklists, the specific questions worth bringing to your own doctor, the full walkthrough of exactly what to watch for as you get older. That's what I've put together in the resource I mentioned briefly at the start. The link is sitting right there in the description whenever you're ready to go a little deeper than any single video could ever cover on its own. Everything I've shared with you today is general educational information based on published research in cardiology and geriatric medicine. It isn't personal medical advice, and it isn't a diagnosis of anything currently happening inside your own body specifically. If you already have an existing heart condition, or you're currently on blood pressure medication, please talk with your own doctor about your particular situation, your specific timing, your specific risks, and anything at all you've personally noticed during your own mornings that felt worth mentioning to someone who actually knows your full history. Think of this video as a solid starting point for that conversation, not a replacement for it. Thanks so much for watching all the way through, and I'll see you in the next one.